It's super obvious to anyone looking at my channel that I'm a Fallout fan, but what you wouldn't know is that I'm really into H.P. Lovecraft and cosmic horror too. So how is that relevant? Well, there's a really strong note of cosmic horror running throughout some entries in the Fallout series, something that ticks that box for me and unites two areas of fiction that I really love. Post-apocalyptic and cosmic horror work really well together. I know I'm not the first to make a video like this, but what I wanted to do was run through things in a sort of timeline fashion and link the events in-game to their specific Lovecraftian references. I also wanted to do it in such a way where I don't get lost in the weeds and give you a decent storytelling feel that has a nice relaxing flow to it. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first instance of cosmic horror in Fallout's timeline happens long before the bombs fell. In the late 19th century, an ambitious archaeologist named Lorenzo Cabot was digging for lost cities in the Arabian desert. In 1894, Lorenzo's team struck something extraordinary beneath the sands of the Rub al-Khali, the legendary city of Ubar, also known as the Atlantis of the Sands. This incident over a century before the Great War plants one of Fallout's first seeds of cosmic horror. Inside, they found a crown-like artifact clearly not made by any human civilization, a find straight out of a Lovecraft story. Lorenzo couldn't resist. He placed this alien crown upon his head, and from that night on, everything changed. The artifact fused to his nervous system and granted him immortality, telekinesis, and horrifying visions. He became convinced he could communicate with ancient inhuman precursors through it. In true cosmic horror fashion, this knowledge also eroded Lorenzo's sanity and morality. So, I alluded to Lovecraftian references just there, but what are the real concrete connections? Let's start with Ubar itself, which is clearly a reference to Lovecraft's The Nameless City, a story about finding an eons-old non-human city under Arabian sands. Lorenzo's discovery, a powerful artifact in a forbidden tomb, also has clearly been influenced by classic Lovecraft tales like The Call of Cthulhu, where a cultist's idol reveals ancient truths, or Out of the Aeons, where a museum artifact holds a trapped cosmic entity. Even Lorenzo's ship home, the SS Wakeful, is a nod to Lovecraft's SS Alert from The Call of Cthulhu. The Cyclopean stone blocks Lorenzo describes borrow Lovecraft's signature adjective for impossibly ancient architecture. Everything about Cabot's story of exploration is a love letter to Lovecraft's trope of scholars uncovering terrible elder secrets. You know I love talking about what Fallout fans say about the games, and on Reddit various theories surface from time to time, such as the idea that Lorenzo's crown might be some kind of Elder Scrolls reference. Dwemer, Daedric, many variations have been floated, and then there's fans talking about the real-world references, more specifically looking at the Lovecraftian ones and how the crown itself is a nod to Lovecraft's shining trapezahedron, or an artifact of Yog-Sothoth. Really interesting stuff from the fandom. What do you think? Continuing on to Fallout's next example of cosmic horror, we're moving next to New England. Many years after Lorenzo unearthed horrors overseas, some other pre-war figures were dabbling in darkness. Enter Richard Dunwich and Constance Blackhall, a brother-sister pair with more than a little interest in the occult. By the mid-20th century, Constance led a secret cult in the swamps of Maryland, where she would go on to live an unnaturally long lifespan due to an occult book and practices. We'll explore this more later. And Richard became an industrialist with a very peculiar business model. He founded Dunwich Borers LLC, ostensibly a company selling drilling equipment, but in truth it was a front to finance his arcane excavations. Across the East Coast, Dunwich set up mining sites that served a normal purpose to extract resources, of course, but also to search for ancient relics tied to a god named Ugg-Koltoth. Dunwich Borers' safety record was abysmal, and deliberately so. Accidents conveniently eliminated workers as human sacrifices when a dig neared something important. In Washington, D.C., Richard built the Dunwich Building in a remote spot specifically to dig underneath it, and up in Massachusetts, Dunwich Borers ran a quarry that likewise hid a secret purpose. So what are the Lovecraft connections here? Well, to start with, the name Dunwich is a big flashing neon sign. Fallout's writers named Richard's enterprise after Lovecraft's story The Dunwich Horror. In that tale, a backwoods family worships a cosmic entity and eventually unleashes a monstrosity upon their town. By invoking the Dunwich name, Fallout's writers signal that Richard and Constance are essentially Fallout's version of the Wheatley family from Lovecraft, conducting blasphemous rituals and delving where man ought not tread. According to Fallout lore references, Ugg-Qualtoth, the being they worship, is likely inspired by Lovecraft's Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young. To me, Constance Blackhall living unnaturally long, thanks to a dark occult tome and the Dunwich sites eventually giving rise to ghoul-infested nightmares, feels very much like the Dunwich Horror reimagined. The pre-war occult machinations of Constance Blackhall and more specifically Richard Dunwich mostly come to light later through terminals, notes and environmental storytelling in Fallout 3 and 4, and they are really important in pulling together the strands of cosmic horror and post-apocalypse that I love so much, with a dash of the dystopian too. The idea that a corporation was performing occult rituals right under society's nose is really fascinating to me. Imagine actually living in Fallout's world pre-war, a dystopian 2077 where not only was there shadowy government science, FEV Vault-Tec experiments, but also private cultists meddling with cosmic powers. What I love about this is that it's not front and centre for the player. Unless you investigate places like the Dunwich Building or read the Fallout tabletop RPG sourcebook notes, you wouldn't know the full extent. But once you do, it retroactively explains the bizarre things you encounter in those sites. It's a slow burn world building technique, and the juxtaposition is extremely effective in a franchise that's famous for its retro-futuristic look and feel. Here, we have retro-futuristic occultism added into the mix. The idea of corporate exploitation with human sacrifice is absolutely terrifying, and maybe this is an indictment on the world today, but it's sort of believable that corporations would do something like this, or at least give zero damns about their staff, and to me this makes the cosmic chord being added to the Song of Fallout feel eerily plausible in universe, and in tune with the overall music of what Fallout is, and that's me hoping that that musical metaphor makes sense. Anyway, by October 2077, Richard Dunwich was ready to make his big move. In the week right up to the Great War, he sent home all non-cult employees from the DC office and had his loyalists drill into something buried below. On October 23rd, the very day the nukes began to fall, Richard's team broke through into a hidden chamber beneath the Dunwich Building. You can't help but wonder, was it pure coincidence that the apocalypse struck just as this cult accessed their dark prize? Or did the collective death and destruction of the Great War empower something sleeping beneath the earth? It's a theory that the Great War itself might have opened the door for these eldritch forces to have their resurgence. Keep that in mind as we head further into the post-war years. October 23rd, 2077. The day the world ended in fire. While millions perished in the shadows of that catastrophe, a few dark rituals reached their climax. As mentioned, Richard Dunwich's excavators breached a cavern on the very day of the nukes. Deep under the office building, they discovered the Dunwich obelisk, an eerie, towering monolith covered in skulls with a vaguely human shape fused into it. This altar to Ugg-Qualtoth began emanating malign influence immediately. Did Richard intend to awaken his god amidst the chaos of nuclear war? We never find Richard's fate, but the implication is grim. Perhaps he was consumed by the power he sought. Fallout 3 shows us this obelisk still standing, quietly pulsing with otherworldly energy many years later. The timing of this monolith being uncovered as the war broke out above is poetic, as the world burns above the surface and ancient horror stirs below. Lovecraft often wrote of cosmic beings indifferent to humanity's struggles. Here, while humans wipe themselves out with bombs, an eldritch being possibly returns to its deep temple. Simultaneously, another Dunwich site sees carnage. At the Dunwich Borers Quarry in Massachusetts, several employees were bound and sacrificed in a ritual just moments before the Great War hit. When the bombs fell, those sacrificed workers rose as feral ghouls, as if transformed by dark power rather than radiation alone. The cultists left behind a sinister relic at the bottom of the flooded quarry, an occult blade called Krem's Tooth, placed on a bloody altar between two mini nukes. It's as if they were planning to use the detonations themselves as part of some dark ceremony. Talk about going out with a bang. This scene only fully revealed when wastelanders explore the quarry 210 years later suggests the cult tried to harness the apocalypse as the ultimate sacrifice to Ugg-Qualtoth. And far from these epicenters in the remote swamp of Point Lookout, the ancient Constance Blackhall and her swamp folk followers weathered the nuclear storm. Constance, sustained by an occult book called the Krivbikna, survived the war and persisted as the cult's priestess for years after. On the Day of Doom, perhaps she saw it as fulfillment of prophecy, a feast of souls for her dark god. There's little detail of her actions on October the 23rd, 2077, but we know she lived on, unnaturally long-lived by Ugg-Qualtoth's boons, guiding the swamp cult through the post-war years. As I've alluded to earlier, the idea of cosmic entities taking advantage of humanity's collapse is very Lovecraftian. In Lovecraft's mythos, the stars aligning or global catastrophes often presage the rise of the old ones. Here, the Great War might have been one big occult catalyst. Fans have speculated on forums that Ugg-Qualtoth may have arranged things such that the nukes effectively performed a mass ritual. It's a stretch, but the eerie coincidences fuel that imagination. A Steam forum user mused that Atom, the Children of Atom's god of the glow, and Ugg-Qualtoth could even be connected ancient beings using nuclear war to spread influence. In any case, the writers of the Fallout series cleverly let these events lurk in the background. If you play the games without digging, the nukes were just war. But if you connect the dots, there's this unsettling possibility that something else awakened on that day, something older and far worse than radiation. A Den of Geek article summarised it perfectly, describing it as a broader cosmology to the horrors emerging in the wake of nuclear flame. And so the bombs tore open the curtain, it would seem, and Fallout's wastelands inherited more than radiation and mutants, but ghouls, ghosts and eldritch echoes as well. As an aside here, things like Fallout 76's Smiling Man and the ghost of Lucy Grantchester in Fallout 4 feel to me like they fit into this tearing of the veil, because it really does feel like the paranormal is much more of a real thing in Fallout than it is in the real world, and it seems this might have been because of the war itself. Moving past the day the war broke out and the nuclear exchange that sealed the fate of the world, survivors picked up the pieces in the decades after, and in some forgotten corners, cults carried on. In West Virginia, a pre-war doomsday cult centred on the mythical Mothman survived the blasts. Hiding in the Lucky Hole mine as the bombs fell, these cultists experienced a schism. Some remained faithful to the benign, wise Mothman, but others turned to darker worship when the world above burned. In the pitch-black mine tunnels, they began venerating something they called the Firstborn of the Wood. By 2102, all human inhabitants of Appalachia had been killed by the scorched plague or left the region. But in 2103, the followers of the Winged One returned to the mine and reclaimed it. If the player explores Lucky Hole Mine, they can find hidden passages leading to a secret nave. There, in a foggy cavern adorned with bones and twisted roots, lies the Interloper, a massive, dormant, plant-like creature half fused to the earth. It sort of looks like a corpse tree with a human-like torso, countless hand-like branches and oozing sap that looks like blood. This entity simply rests, not reacting much even if attacked, as if in a torpor. 5 statue faces in the chamber's walls seem to gaze at it, silent witnesses. As a side note, these faces are seen all over Fallout, on buildings, and also there's one buried at Dunwich Building in Fallout 4. The Interloper practically screams Lovecraftian horror. A huge unknown life form deep underground, vaguely reminiscent of wood and flesh. It is absolutely influenced by Lovecraft's idea of primordial beings sleeping beneath us. Some fans have likened the Interloper to one of Shub-Niggurath's dark young from the Cthulhu mythos, essentially a spawn of a forest god. The cult's phrases like Firstborn of the Wood and Winged One tie nature and deity together, similar to how Lovecraftian cults give their alien gods folkloric titles. I simply cannot ignore the parallels to the Dunwich horror story. There, a half-human spawn of an elder god lurked in a farmhouse. Here, a likely spawn or firstborn of Unknowable lies in a mine. And those statue faces on the walls watching the Interloper? As well as being common in the Fallout universe anyway, they actually recall imagery from Lovecraft's The Shunned House, where a monstrous entity's face appeared in the masonry. What's brilliant is that this was added via Fallout 76 updates, expanding the Lovecraftian thread earlier in the timeline. Bethesda connected it to the Mothman storyline, so it didn't come from nowhere. It's the result of a cult losing their way. It tied Fallout 76 back to that ongoing cosmic horror narrative that started in Fallout 3. Importantly, the Interloper is left a mystery. It doesn't attack, doesn't speak, it's just there. That storytelling restraint is effective, making it a memorable set piece that players theorise about for years. Is it alive or petrified? Will it awaken one day? The game leaves those questions unanswered. For me, that's a huge aspect of effective horror, especially cosmic horror. Not understanding, not having answers is really important to maintain that vibe. But, of course, there are theories. Some believe the Interloper is actually Ugg-Qualtoth, or at least its physical avatar, the first of many to come. Firstborn might imply there are more. Others suggest it's merely a guardian or child of Ugg-Qualtoth, placed to convert the Mothman cultists. A cool detail. A note from cultist Jeff Lane in 76 indicates he was called by the Interloper through vivid visions, much like how Lovecraftian gods call out psychically to sensitive minds. Reddit discussions speculated that the Interloper might grow into something like a new Tree of Life or Tree of Death in Appalachia, a dark mirror to Harold, the human-turned tree in Fallout 3. For now, it remains one of Fallout's spookiest unexplained sights. Elsewhere in Appalachia, we come across the Visitor, a deceased creature introduced in the Wastelanders update. It lies curled on its side in a hidden chamber of the deep. Its body is pale red and wood-like, and when struck, bloody wounds appear on its surface. Strange black dots rise from it like smoke and rapidly fade. Its head resembles the hand-like blooms that split from strangler vines, and it also resembles the Interloper found in Lucky Hole Mine. Unlike the Interloper though, the Visitor doesn't move, and there's no evidence of ceremonies or gatherings in its chamber. Nearby in the cave, a holotape titled President's Eyes Only can be found on the body of a White Spring Resort staff member wearing a diving suit. The holotape contains the staff member, James Addison, rambling about earthquakes and his excitement at what he saw in the cave, although his description is manic and inaccurate. His cause of death is unclear. Whether there's any connection between the Interloper and the Visitor isn't clear at all, but I thought it worth mentioning anyway. Back up north, the Dunwich Building itself became a legendary haunt in the wasteland. For decades after the war, anyone who strayed too close to these ruins near Washington, D.C. would hear whispers and go mad. Records mention deranged survivors as early as the 2130s babbling about Ugg-Qualtoth returning to his deep temple. By the time the Lone Wanderer arrives in 2277, the place is infamous. It's one of Fallout 3's most memorable locations. A crumbling office tower teeming with feral ghouls, and something far more frightening. I think many of you watching this video, like me, will never forget your first time coming across the Dunwich Building. It's etched into my memory forever. Thankfully, I was 21 when Fallout 3 came out, so I was old enough to really take in my experience of the game. Anyway, as you descend through the Dunwich Building's dark levels, you find personal journals of a scavenger named Jamie Palabras who came looking for his father. With each entry, Jamie loses grip on reality, influenced by the building's evil presence. Eventually you reach the underground, virulent underchambers where the air is thick with radiation and an unseen voice echoes in your ears. At the bottom lies the obelisk itself, pulsating, whispering, driving the ghouls into frenzy. Jamie, now a feral ghoul, worships at this altar, muttering an eldritch chant, and seems to be summoning ghouls out of the mist near a recess in the wall across the room. The atmosphere is pure horror. The whole descent mirrors Lovecraft's The Dunwich Horror climax, where investigators descend to confront an unseen horror born of dark ritual. Jamie's fate parallels many Lovecraft protagonists who gradually go insane reading forbidden texts or exploring cursed sites. In one of his journal entries, he even writes a disturbing line: "Sharp knife to send him to deep temple, flay and say my words, Abdul comes again." The name Abdul is almost certainly a nod to Abdul Alhazred, Lovecraft's fictional author of the Necronomicon. Jamie, under the obelisk's sway, is reciting cult incantations that sound straight out of Lovecraft. The whispering voice that Fallout 3 players hear in the Dunwich ruins is recorded in a terminal as chanting, "Ugg Qualtoth is returned, one of us," reminiscent of the clannish, hideous revelry of Lovecraft's devil-worshipping cults. Fans immediately picked up on this at Fallout 3's release. Basically think H.P. Lovecraft, Elder Gods, Cthulhu, and you're on the right track, one player explained. It was a refreshing shift from Fallout's usual sci-fi vaults. Here was pure cosmic horror in the wasteland. It was pretty shocking at the time. It was something completely new to most players. As far as I'm concerned, the Dunwich Building set a high bar in environmental storytelling. There's no NPC explaining things to you. You experience the horror. Many players like me recall this area as genuinely scary. It's often compared to a survival horror game level dropped into an RPG. Obviously, moving outside of the chronology that we've done in universe, we know that this really was the first reveal in release order of Ugg Qualtoth's existence, and I think it hit perfectly at the time. It feels like a ghost story told around a campfire. And another fantastic aspect of this is that you could miss it entirely if you never wander there, which oddly makes it more effective, an unsettling secret rather than a mandatory boss fight. Over the years, lots of people on forums have lauded the Dunwich Building as one of Fallout's best side stories precisely because it left unanswered questions. What is the obelisk? Is it weird, alien cosmic horror tech? Occult artifact? Why is there sort of a human figure in it? The game doesn't say. This storytelling restraint, something we've looked at already and we'll look at again, drew players into lengthy theory crafting, which is the mark of effective cosmic horror. Our imagination does the work. Even years later, new Fallout fans will be stumbling into the Fallout subreddit and other places and probably saying, has anyone else been to that Dunwich Building? And what the heck was that? It really does stick with you. Now, as we've touched upon, when it comes to fan theories, I love them. And at the time, everybody was talking about the Dunwich Building and had the theories that we've talked about above, among many others. Now, obviously, that is time-gated because a lot of that was answered later when Point Lookout came out. But it may be fun to have a look at some of the theories that people discussed. Now, because Jamie's journal mentions Alhazred, a few fans half-jokingly pondered if Lovecraft's books exist in Fallout's timeline. Now, the funny thing is, they do, because the timeline divergence in the Fallout universe started in 1945, meaning that perhaps some crazy cultist pre-war tried to recreate Lovecraft's fictional rituals and accidentally made them real. One tongue-in-cheek lore discussion even posited that maybe H.P. Lovecraft was a prophet in the Fallout universe, correctly predicting beings like Ugg Qualtoth. But a more grounded theory connected the dots that the Krev Bikna book and Point Lookout likely summoned or created the obelisk's effects. Essentially, Obadiah Blackhall's cult, coming up next, might have been responsible for the Dunwich site's power, not just the object itself. This cross-DLC speculation was later supported by the idea that returning the book to the obelisk stops its evil, which players can do. Later in 2277, the Lone Wanderer travels to Point Lookout, Maryland. There, this Lovecraftian saga deepens. You meet an old southern gentleman, Obadiah Blackhall, who asks you to retrieve a family heirloom stolen by local tribals. The book we've mentioned before, named the Krev Bikna. It sounds simple, but as you dig in, sometimes literally through swamp mud and ritual sites, you realise this isn't just any book. It's basically Fallout's Necronomicon. The swamp folk tribals who stole it have been using it in grotesque rituals at a sunken church. If you find their altar, you witness the aftermath of bloody rites and fight crazed locals protecting the book. The Krevbikna itself is described in-game as an ancient, evil text brimming with arcane knowledge. Once you claim it, you have a choice: return it to Obadiah or try to destroy it. If you give it to Obadiah, he becomes immediately dismissive of the player and retreats to his basement to use the book in his occult rituals. He's the last living member of that Ugg-Qualtoth cult, after all, and he presumably wanted the grimoire back to continue his family's dark work. Since Obadiah is the great-great-great-grandson of Constance Blackhall, the long-lived priestess and sister of Richard Dunwich that we discussed earlier, who died after the tribals stole the book, perhaps Obadiah wants to use the book to reassert the cult's dominance. If you instead take the Krevbikna to the Dunwich Building's obelisk and place it there, a special event triggers. Fire shoots out from the obelisk as it seemingly consumes the book, and the evil presence is banished, at least temporarily. This entire quest, titled The Dark Heart of Blackhall, is a direct riff on Lovecraft's common plot. A cursed book like the Necronomicon or De Vermis Mysteris in his stories, and the morally grey choice of what to do with it. The tribals using it for rituals is just like countless Lovecraft-inspired games and fiction where isolated communities turn to dark gods. Even the name Krevbikna has that tongue-twisting, pseudo-phonetic style Lovecraft gave to his forbidden books, like Anaus Sprechlichen Kulten or Narcotic manuscripts. The showdown at the altar in the swamp calls to mind the Dunwich horror again. Recall how that story involved a sorcerer's diary and a climactic ritual in rural Massachusetts. Here we have a sorceress's book and a ritual in the American South, but the DNA is similar. Also, the Blackhall family's role is essentially the generational cursed family, much like the Martinses in Lovecraft's The Lurking Fear or the Marsh family of Innsmouth. They too consorted with darkness and paid the price. This was Fallout's first explicit follow-up to the Dunwich mystery, and it paid off nicely. By letting the player actively use the Lovecraftian artifact, destroy or deliver, it gave a sense of agency in these horror events, which is uncommon in cosmic horror, where usually characters are helpless. Some critique from players at the time was that the quest was a bit short. They hungered for even more lore about Ugg-Qualtoth in Point Lookout. The DLC being standalone doesn't drastically change the main game world. Even if you destroy the book at the obelisk, it's more a cool Easter egg than a game-altering outcome. But as an expansion of the lore, it was very effective. It confirmed that the Dunwich stuff in Fallout 3 wasn't a one-off Easter egg, it's part of a larger narrative thread. Also, the atmosphere in that swamp ritual, deep fog, half-sunken church, flickering candles, was praised. Fallout had done urban horror in the Dunwich Building, now it did Bayou horror, and it worked. So, by 2277, players had encountered an obelisk, an evil book, and learned of a cult spanning centuries, all tied to this one dark deity. The choice in the quest led to debates amongst fans. Which ending is better for the world? Many argued that destroying the book at Dunwich is canonically the right move, since it ends the long, influential reign of the book and seems to neutralise the obelisk's influence. Players noted that doing so stops the ghoul respawns in Dunwich for a time, implying a cleansing. Yet some sneaky types gave it to Obadiah, wondering if that could lead to more content. It doesn't. He basically thanks you, then presumably continues his plotting off-screen. A fun theory is that Obadiah might show up again in the future. After all, he's one of the few named cultists left. There's another fun theory that the body fused into the Dunwich obelisk might actually be Constance Blackhall herself or someone else, indicating a human sacrifice bound to the artifact. Of course, Point Lookout implies Constance only died when the book was taken, so maybe her soul was tied to it or the obelisk. A very spooky thought that the Dunwich ghost or thing was this swamp witch projecting across states. So with the Blackhall saga wrapped up for now, the East Coast seemed to quiet on the cosmic horror front for a few years. The events of Fallout 3 and its DLCs in 2277 let the player largely neutralise the immediate threats. Dunwich's obelisk fell silent, we presume, and the swamp cult lost their treasured book, but as any Lovecraft fan knows, eldritch evils are never gone for good. They merely slumber, and in the Commonwealth circa 2287, they were about to stir again. The sole survivor's journey in Fallout 4 brought us to New England, the very heart of Lovecraft country. Appropriately, Bethesda packed Fallout 4 with more Lovecraftian references and cosmic horror set pieces than any previous game. What's special is that Fallout 4 presents these in the in-universe chronological order of discovery by the player, but behind the scenes, many of these horrors trace back to the pre-war and 2077 events we've discussed. So let's break down all the key instances in Fallout 4 which together form a sort of Lovecraftian resurgence in post-war Massachusetts. When the sole survivor explores the Dunwich Borers site, now just a massive pit mine overrun by raiders, many players who had experienced Fallout 3 might have suspected they were walking into a sequel of the Dunwich Building's nightmare. As you fight through the raiders and descend into the earth, strange things start happening. You start having hallucinatory flashbacks, brief visions show pre-war miners frantically working by lamplight, clearly terrified. Each flash of white reveals more. A man in a pastor's vestments, nicknamed the Butcher in the game files, standing over prisoners. With each vision it becomes clear that this was the ritual Richard Dunwich's people performed on the eve of the war. By the final vision, you witness the cult binding and sacrificing victims, then a burst of light ends the hallucination and you're back in present time wading through a flooded cavern full of ghouls. At the very bottom you find that altar for real, and on that altar is Kremv's tooth, the sacrificial blade, still there after 2 centuries. Now a gruesome, unique melee weapon for the taking. But the creepiest discovery? A gigantic stone head with a blank cyclopean face stares out from the rock wall. This statue is never explained in-game explicitly, but it looks very much like the statues that you see near the Visitor and also all around ruined buildings of both Washington DC and Boston. Now the question here would be, if this statue is under the ground and had always been there, then surely that statue is the thing that inspired the statues above ground, somehow even through some kind of latent psychic influence. Because clearly nobody knew that the statue was down there. There really isn't much of an explanation. It's a real mystery. The raiders who recently took over the site were completely oblivious. They mention the place being haunted but don't grasp what lies beneath. The sole survivor, however, gets the full force of it. Vivid nightmares of the past and a face-to-face encounter with what potentially could be a forgotten god's visage. It almost doesn't need to be said, but Fallout 4's Dunwich Borers is a veritable treasure trove of Lovecraftian nods. The very mechanic of flashbacks and hallucinations is like a playable version of the Lovecraftian storytelling method, revealing ancient atrocities through fragmentary accounts. Think of the diary entries in The Shadow Out of Time or the case of Charles Dexter Ward, where past horrors bleed into the present. The giant statue with one closed eye revealed recalls the cyclopean idols of Lovecraft's tales, especially in the Call of Cthulhu, where a grotesque bas-relief of Cthulhu is studied. It also has shades of the Shunned House, where an amorphous being manifests a face in mould. Here, an idol gazes up with its eye closed. According to the Fallout 4 art notes, that huge face is actually a reused Art Deco asset. Fun fact, its final name is Metro Man, but the effect is undeniably one of a slumbering god's countenance. Lovecraft often described his ancient entities as colossal sculptures or reliefs buried in ruins. Cthulhu's tomb city, R'lyeh, is full of them. The altar scene with bound captives and a robe cultist chanting is basically every tabletop Call of Cthulhu scenario's climax. Classic Lovecraftian cult behaviour. Even the name Kremv has a Lovecraftian ring. Some fans noted it sounds vaguely like Kezia from the dreams in The Witch House, or other devil names. Likely it's just made up to sound eldritch. And of course, once again, the location name Dunwich directly ties it back. By revisiting the Dunwich theme in Fallout 4, Bethesda created a sense of continuity. It's integrated extremely well because it's optional content that feels like it's a discovery. The section is entirely self-contained. You could miss the story if you don't read terminals or pay attention to visions or just leave thinking, weird quarry, cool knife. But for fans of the lore, it massively expands what we know about the cult's final moments pre-war. Importantly, Fallout 4 does not mention Obadiah or the book here. That story was resolved already. Instead, it focuses on new elements, the statue, the knife, to broaden the mythos. Some fans felt Dunwich Borders lacked an obvious follow-up. Unlike Fallout 3, there's no immediate quest tied to it, but I really appreciate that. It's environmental storytelling at its best. We've already covered the Cabot family's backstory, Lorenzo's expedition in the 1890s, but now let's see the next part of the story in 2287 through the sole survivor's eyes. You meet Jack Cabot, a scientist in a mansion in Boston who hires you to retrieve some mysterious serum. Soon enough, you're embroiled in a family drama out of a 1920s weird tale. You learn Jack's father, Lorenzo Cabot, has been locked in an asylum for 400 years, kept alive and dangerous by that alien crown he's wearing. The family, Jack, his mother Wilhelmina, and his sister Imogen, have been injecting Lorenzo's blood serum to remain ageless themselves. It's vampiric in a way. They literally feed off the eldritch power while keeping the source contained. Jack believes that Lorenzo is irredeemably insane and that if freed he'd unleash horrors. Another twist is that Lorenzo's telepathic powers from the crown allow him to influence people. A cult of wastelanders, the Parsons Lunatic Asylum Raiders, worship Lorenzo like a god, trying to break him out. This is very similar to Lovecraft's The Whisperer in Darkness or The Thing on the Doorstep, where imprisoned sorcerers had remote influence. The climax comes when the sole survivor must decide: side with Jack to kill Lorenzo by shutting off his life support, or side with Lorenzo who claims he was wrongfully imprisoned and free him. If you free him, Lorenzo indeed goes on a murderous rampage, proving Jack's fears right, and even suggests he'll use the crown to subjugate the world. If instead you kill Lorenzo, Jack gives you Lorenzo's artifact gun, a jury-rigged gamma weapon using the crown's telekinesis tech, saying he's tapped a bit of its power for good use. Either way, the quest is a rare instance where Fallout lets you indirectly interact with someone connected to the cosmic horror arc, because Lorenzo is basically a man imbued with an old one's power. We touched on many Lovecraft connections earlier, the Nameless City, etc., but experiencing it in-game, you see even more pulp references. The whole Cabot House quest feels like a mix of Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard or H.P. Lovecraft's revision tales, where explorers find forbidden artifacts. Some dialogue is almost pastiche. Lorenzo raves about ancient minds that founded our civilization and sees himself above human law. A classic case of I have seen the truth and now I am beyond morality, which is how Lovecraft often characterized his cult leaders or mad scholars. The choice to free or kill Lorenzo is analogous to many mythos stories where the protagonist either stops the cult or creature at a cost or fails and unleashes doom. The Cabot quest also brings to mind Lovecraft stories like The Rats in the Walls, an old family estate with hidden horror, The Moonbog, an archaeologist disturbs an ancient site, and obviously Call of Cthulhu. And for me, the Cabot questline stands out a bit in the Lovecraftian Fallout storyline because it's arguably more overtly supernatural sci-fi than anything in the main story of any of the games. While the aliens we see in the series are definitely sci-fi and the other Lovecraftian stuff is super cosmic horror, this is straight up blending the two. I definitely love it myself. When looking at other player reaction online, some of them loved the tone and others felt it was a bit pulpier than the rest of the game and felt it was to its detriment. I would argue though that it's integrated pretty well by being entirely optional and off the beaten path. You have to find Cabot House or the asylum to start it, and you can choose whether to engage or not. The writing cleverly couches Lorenzo's powers in pseudoscience, ancient alien civilization tech, which gives deniability. You can call it super advanced science rather than magic in your own headcanon if you want to. One of course could critique that the Cabot plot doesn't tie into anything else in Fallout 4, whereas Dunwich Borders tied to previous lore. However, for many players and me personally, this quest was a highlight. It felt like stepping into a short story. Integration-wise, the Cabot story is pretty effective at fleshing out the idea that multiple unrelated occult threads exist in Fallout's world. Ugg-Qualtoth in one corner, and perhaps some other cosmic entity that made Lorenzo's crown in another. The Cabots do not mention Ugg-Qualtoth at all. This suggests a larger mythos with different cults. That broadens Fallout's horror elements beyond one singular big bad and makes it a bit more realistic. Just as the real world has various legends, their world has various weird phenomena. With that being said, the fans as ever had their own theories. One that emerged is that Lorenzo's precursors might be the same beings worshipped as Ugg-Qualtoth, or even that Lorenzo's crown could be a creation of that cult from ancient times. Obviously there's no explicit evidence, but fans love linking everything. Others have speculated on what other alien cities Lorenzo hinted at. In one dialogue, Jack muses Lorenzo believed there was another alien city buried in the Mojave. A tongue-in-cheek reference to New Vegas perhaps, or just an open question for future content. Some wondered if this was a foreshadowing for a DLC that never happened. Obviously it didn't, but it sets imaginations wild. What if Fallout goes to Lovecraftian ruins in the Mojave in a future title? And one more wild theory tie-in. Some fans noticed parallels between Lorenzo's blood anomalies granting powers and FEV's mutation effects. While to me it feels like it's a bit of a stretch, a Reddit theory suggested maybe some early Enclave or Institute researchers got wind of the Cabot serum and that inspired aspects of their work, again blending science and the occult. It's not canon obviously, but it's the kind of cross-connecting fans love to discuss on forums. Moving beyond the big storylines, the Commonwealth has a few smaller Lovecraftian Easter eggs and horror-flavoured locales that deserve mention. In Boston's North End, the sole survivor can stumble upon Pickman Gallery, an art studio filled with horrifying paintings and raiders' corpses posed as art installations. Inside is Pickman, an elegant but deranged serial killer who only targets raiders. This is a direct homage to H.P. Lovecraft's short story Pickman's Model. In that story, Pickman was an artist painting unnervingly realistic ghouls. The twist was he had a real ghoul as a model. In Fallout 4, Pickman's paintings aren't of monsters but are made with the blood of his victims. The connection is mostly in name and the concept of a twisted artist in a secret gallery. Fans enjoyed this as a subtle nod. It doesn't involve mythos creatures, but it shows Fallout devs sprinkling in horror literature references for those in the know. On the critical side, some felt the encounter was a bit too short. You basically kill some raiders, meet Pickman, that's it. But as a mood piece, the blood-smeared gallery with eerie paintings whose subjects seem to watch you is highly effective. On the coast, there's Kingsport Lighthouse, occupied by a hostile sect of the Children of Atom. The name Kingsport is lifted from Lovecraft. Kingsport is the setting of his story The Festival, which involves a coastal town, a secret cult, and a winter solstice ritual in a churchyard. In Fallout 4 at the lighthouse, the Children of Atom have a ritual where they worship a glowing one, a highly radioactive feral ghoul, at the top of the lighthouse as if it's a deity. The vibe is very much cloaked cultists performing pre-human rites, exactly as Lovecraft's Kingsport cult did. The connection is cemented by Fallout 4's devs, noting Kingsport was Lovecraft's fictional town. This is a cool fusion of Fallout's own religion, Children of Atom, with a Lovecraft location. It's integrated logically. Children of Atom are scattered all over, why not here? And it's fun for players who catch the reference. Some fans speculate that this could hint that the Children of Atom fill a similar niche as Lovecraft's cults, worshipping something genuinely supernatural. Maybe Atom is another mask of a cosmic entity. Now, thinking of the glow as a force, we could maybe take that as a nod to Lovecraft's The Colour Out of Space, where an alien colour infects a farm, causing mutation and madness, effectively a forerunner of the radiation sickness trope. I will give an aside here that the movie Colour Out of Space, which came out in 2019, is absolutely fantastic and comes highly recommended from me. Nicolas Cage is at his absolutely insane best, and there's some of the most disturbing body horror scenes you'll ever see. Anyway, in Far Harbour, set in Maine, some fans expected a full Shadow over Innsmouth scenario. After all, we're in coastal New England with fog and fishy monsters. While Far Harbour's main story went in a different direction, synths and islanders, you can see shades of Innsmouth in the degenerate trapper population and the fact that villagers are beset by deep fog, bringing creatures, not exactly deep ones, but fog crawlers and anglers. And then there's Salem, where Fallout 4 has the Salem Museum of Witchcraft, more a homage to colonial witch legends and a surprise Deathclaw encounter than Lovecraft. But of course Salem appears in Lovecraft lore as well, the witch Kezia from Dreams in the Witch House. Fallout doesn't directly tie that museum to Lovecraft, but the ambience, creaky old house, lurking horror, aligns with cosmic horror in feel if not substance. So as we said earlier, all in all, and even more so than in Fallout 3, 2287 in the Commonwealth was like a reawakening of Fallout's Lovecraftian elements. A major cult site redux, Dunwich Borders, a face-to-face with a Lovecraftian empowered immortal, Cabot, and numerous Easter eggs, Kingsport, Pikmin, etc. The storytelling style ranged from overt, visions, boss fight, to subtle, names, environmental clues, which together made Fallout 4 a playground for cosmic horror fans like me. Bethesda clearly had fun. So, having meandered through the Fallout timeline, we can clearly see how cosmic horror is a major undercurrent. From Lorenzo's pre-war encounter with alien relics, through the Dunwich atrocities on the eve of destruction, to wasteland cults and haunted sites encountered by heroes, there's a sense that humanity's hubris, nuclear war, scientific overreach exists alongside older unknowable evils. Of course, these stories aren't the main plot of Fallout, but they provide a shadow narrative and underbelly that makes the universe feel older and stranger than a typical apocalyptic setting. This is really canny on the part of Bethesda. If you watch Urbex videos on YouTube, you'll probably have come across one or two where the urban explorers come across something seemingly supernatural. I absolutely love these videos, especially when they come from creators that aren't actually on the hunt for spooky stuff. Two of my favourites ever come from the channel exploring abandoned mines and unusual places. If you go to their videos tab and hit popular, you'll see one video called Creepy Sounds Captured in Abandoned Mine and another with the Horton Mine in the title. Make sure and take a look. Anyway, clearly there's a super rich blend that happens when you mix the abandoned or post-apocalyptic with the supernatural, and that's exactly what's happening in Fallout. Next, I want to take a look at the bigger picture. So let's step back and consider a few overarching themes and fan theories that attempt to tie it all together or speculate on its implications. First of all, it appears that Fallout's world doesn't just have one Cthulhu lurking, it has a pantheon of sorts. There's Qualtoth with its obelisks, books, Interloper spawn, etc. There's whatever power is behind Lorenzo's crown, perhaps the same or perhaps another old one, and possibly even Atom as a deity of radiation if one interprets it that way. This raises the intriguing notion that the Great War's radioactive aftermath might have been a blooming season for dormant dark gods, each region's survivors encountering different manifestations. The open-ended nature of these Easter eggs means Fallout's storytellers, or future writers, have room to play. Maybe in a future Fallout we will see a quest where the Children of Atom's holy glow does something unmistakably supernatural, confirming or subverting these fan suspicions. Another interesting thought is the theory that the nuclear war itself was the trigger for these cosmic forces to re-emerge. It's almost poetic justice. Humanity unleashes nuclear fire and in doing so cracks open the prisons of slumbering eldritch beings or empowers cults to perform grand rituals. There's no official word on this, but it's a common thread in discussions. People cite how conveniently timed the Dunwich events were, or how after the war you have ghouls which could be seen as quasi-undead servants for a dark power. Perhaps the reason these incidents were fewer in Fallout 1 and 2 on the West Coast is simply because those games focused elsewhere. But in universe, one could say maybe those ancient evils are concentrated in the Old East, Lovecraft country and the DC area, and took time to build influence. By the late 2200s, they are seeping out more. It's speculative but fun, imagining that Fallout 5 or 6 could escalate this subplot, maybe a cult trying to cause a second apocalypse to fully summon their god. The community is split on this. Some would love a DLC where you fight a massive Lovecraftian beast, others insist it should stay subtle and not overshadow Fallout's core of human drama. Which leads us into the fan debate around how much supernatural is right for Fallout. As we've seen, some fans prefer the Lovecraftian stuff to remain in the margins, a minor part of the world that most wastelanders would never encounter. They argue that it keeps it special and unsettling. Others wouldn't mind if Bethesda leaned in further, perhaps a full questline dealing with an occult conspiracy. Imagine a main quest in a future Fallout where the villain is a cult leader rather than a politician or AI. The general consensus, though, is appreciation for what's been done. Bethesda has walked a delicate line of including these references without turning Fallout into a fantasy horror game. The fact that most wasteland denizens are unaware of Ugwaltoth or Lorenzo's artifact helps maintain that sense of a secret world within the world. In that regard, it's very much like Lovecraft's own lore, where only isolated pockets of people witness the cosmic horrors and the broader public remains ignorant. It's worth noting that fans have also expanded on these ideas with mods. For instance, the popular Fallout 4 mod Children of Ugwaltoth adds a whole new dungeon in the glowing sea, with cultists and eldritch creatures indicating fan appetite to see more. Another interesting thing occurred to me too. If we arrange all references by timeline as I've done here in this video, it gives maybe some clue as to what might happen next. The Ugwaltoth saga, Dunwich, Blackhall, spans from pre-2077 into the 2280s and possibly beyond. The Cabot saga spans the 1890s to 2287 conclusively. And then the Interloper incident or existence is mostly 2080s and possibly ongoing if those cultists persist into the future of the Fallout timeline. So what's next chronologically? If Fallout 5, for example, is set in the 2300s, will some cult have resurfaced anew? Perhaps the Children of Atom by then evolve into a full-blown Lovecraftian cult if they discover something in Atom's glow. Maybe Fallout 76 could expand Appalachia's cult story, perhaps one day letting players actually fight the Interloper if it wakes. An event maybe? But others enjoy the fact that it's unkillable scenery, preferring the mystery. It's a bit of a difficult balance for Bethesda, how to keep this underbelly interesting without dragging it fully into the light, where cosmic horror tends to lose its mystique. As of now, Fallout's cosmic horror elements remain tantalising side stories. None of the main storylines have been about them, and that's likely deliberate. It preserves that feeling that the wasteland holds secrets bigger and a lot more dangerous than all the evil factions, mutants and wars, secrets that only the most unlucky of explorers will ever witness. It's a big part of what gives Fallout's world its depth and spookiness. After all, radiation and mutants are scary in one way, but ancient unknowable gods? That's a whole different chill down the spine, and it's the kind of chill down the spine I can get behind. I'm here for it 100%. So, here we are. We've taken our journey down into the darkness and back out the other side again into the light. From the horror of the Dunwich Building to the halls of an insane asylum, from the swamps of Maryland to the depths of an Appalachian mine, Fallout's cosmic horror crawls through it all like a corrupted tendril of some kind of nightmarish, incomprehensible creature. For me, it makes the story in the games all the richer. It takes, as I've said earlier, that abandoned post-apocalyptic feeling and marries it perfectly with the supernatural. It actually manages to give you that feeling you'll get in abandoned places. If you've ever been to one, you'll know what I mean. Where you just feel that there's something dark and unknowable watching you. And beyond that, the cosmic horror references in Fallout serve other purposes. They pay homage to classic literature, they expand the Fallout universe's lore in unexpected directions, and they deliver some of the most atmospheric, memorable encounters in the series. It should be clear to you that I absolutely love this stuff. I can't get enough of it. Hopefully you'll be inspired to go and read a bit more about Lovecraft and cosmic horror in general. It's a fun genre and I highly recommend it. Before we finish up, I'd be interested to know your thoughts, how you reacted the first time you explored the Dunwich Building, for example, or if you have any theories about the Lovecraftian elements of Fallout. Make sure and comment below if so. With that being said, thank you once again for joining me for one of these explorations. I'll see you next time.